So, it seems as though something has led you to the campsite of the Orator. Well, as you can see, I have stoked the fire, which means it's time to pull up your chair, settle in, because I have another tale to tell. What is this that I can see, with ice cold hands taking hold of me? When God is gone and the devil takes hold, who will have mercy on your soul? Oh, death, oh, death, oh, death, won't you spare me over another year? But before we begin, if you find yourself enjoying this or any of the stories on my channel, first-hand, true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story comes from a Redditor. His real name is Lee Roberts, but you can find him on Reddit as Murphy Brock. I will make sure to link his original story below. But if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, just reach out to me on any of my social media and we'll find a time to collect your story and potentially feature it one day here on The Orator. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's tale. It is a story that I call The Grim Reaper. It is Saturday in the month of February of 2009. Lee Roberts is 52 years old, and he's just on his way right now to go visit his daughter and her family. And they live in a pretty rural place in northeastern United States. And so he's just going to visit, and he's got a couple errands he's running, and he's going to drop something off to her. And so this is just sort of one of the many things he's doing tonight. And so he pulls onto a road and eventually into her driveway. He gets out of his car, and now he's standing in her yard, and it's a pretty large yard, and it's completely dark at this point. It's pretty late at night. The sun has gone down, and he actually can't really see to make his way to the house. Now, luckily, Lee's been here so many times that he can navigate this place in the dark. He's done it a million times, and so he just starts to slowly make his way from the car across the yard to his daughter's house. And suddenly, about halfway across the yard, he stops. He can't see anything, but it's like he suddenly senses that there's something in his path, and he doesn't know what it is. And so, just, instincts, he kind of reaches out with his foot, thinking maybe, one of his daughter's sons, one of his grandsons has maybe left a toy in the yard or something like that. And so he's sort of feeling around for it, and he can't feel anything. And then all of a sudden, off in the distance, way across the yard, he hears sort of like a rustling noise. Like maybe like an animal is in the bushes or something way across the way. But, this rustling, it's sort of accompanied to Lee by this sense of whatever was in his path it's a stronger sense of that. There's just this sense to him that something foreboding is happening. And then all of a sudden, from way across the yard, he sees this thing coming at him. And it's going so fast, whatever this thing is, that it's literally a blur. And it's completely dark out, but somehow this thing that's coming at him, it is just darker than the blackness around it. And remember, it is so dark out right now that Lee couldn't see what he thought might be a toy right in front of his foot. So it is pitch black. And this thing starts flying at him at such an incredible speed, he can't tell what it actually is. And it's coming directly into his path. And all of a sudden, right at the very last moment, like when it's right about to collide with him, and this happens in a matter of seconds, he can't even move or get out of the way, it veers to the left and flies right by him. And just as it's flying by him, he finally gets his first good look at this thing. Now, Lee is 6'3", so he is a tall guy. And this thing, whatever it was, towered over him. He guessed that it was at least 8 feet tall, whatever this thing was. And he said it was leaned forward, almost like it was on a 45-degree angle, and it was literally flying through the air, not figuratively. Its feet were off the ground, never touched the ground, and it was flying at him. And just as it gets beside him and he gets his first good look at this thing, he's just totally stunned. What he's seeing doesn't make any sense. Like I said, this thing's 8 feet tall, and it has on this giant, what looks like a monk's robe, like a traditional monk's robe. It looks brown like a traditional monk's robe. It's all tattered and dirty, and it's got black stains all over it. It looks very weathered and worn. It's got a rope tied around the belt, just like you would see in a traditional monk's robe. And then it has this hood completely over its face. In fact, it's so dramatically over its face that Lee, even though this thing is right next to him for a moment, he can't see its face at all. And this thing comes right at him and veers to the left, and then it just keeps flying by him. As it flies by him, he literally can hear the flapping, the rustling of this cloak as it goes by. And so, as it moves by, the floodlights suddenly come on. This thing, whatever it was, or maybe it was Lee moving to see, had disturbed them. The floodlights had been enough motion for them to come on. And so all of a sudden, the entire yard is flooded with light. And Lee turns around and he watches this thing. It has not disappeared. He watches it as it continues to fly through the yard and then out into the darkness, away from him where he can't see it anymore. And this is obviously terrifying. Whatever this thing was, it had a very ominous feel, and he's very scared. I mean, he's 52 years old, right? He is not the type of person that at this stage in his life is scared of pretty much anything, let alone this apparition, this whatever this thing was, this thing that could not be. And so he runs inside and he enters his daughter's home, and he tries to kind of usher her over to tell her, sort of what he has seen, and she keeps trying to quiet him down. And the reason is because his daughter, her husband, this is the house he sort of grew up in, and they have this big barn out on this property, and he's always thought that barn was haunted, and so he's always been a little creeped out by it. And so she's like, dude, shut up. You were by the barn. This thing came from that direction. Like, he's going to be even more freaked out. We don't need that. And so, at some point, Lee's just like, okay, this is really weird, but I guess I can't talk about it yet. And so, he stays at his daughter's for a little while. They catch up a little bit. He gives her the thing he came over to give her. And then he's just like, hey, I got to go. I have more errands to run. And so he leaves. He gets back out to his car. He sits down. He starts it up. And on a split decision, he decides not to go back the direction he came, which is whatever that thing was, that's the direction it went. Instead, he turned out and went the opposite direction down the road. And he ends up going all the way to this place called Sheetz. Now, if you've ever been to a Sheetz, it's a very interesting place. It's kind of like a hybrid gas station, convenience store, fast food place. They're this huge chain in the Northeast of America. They're all over the place, and they're really, obviously, convenient. You can stop there and get food and gas and everything all in one stop. So they're really great rest stops for long trips. So he pulls in. He finds an empty parking space away from all the other cars. He turns off the car, and for a while he just sits there thinking, because in his brain, the only logical explanation for what he saw, I mean, he's seen this likeness a million times. In fact, almost everybody has. What Lee saw was none other than Big Daddy Death himself. It was the Grim Reaper. I mean, he said it was everything about the Grim Reaper. The height, the robe, the menacing feel, the flying towards him. And so Lee literally is thinking to himself, what just happened? Like, was I supposed to die? Was this thing coming for me? Why did it veer away? Was I spared? Like, he's just going through all this in his head, and he's like, I don't have answers. All I know for certain is that this thing was real. I really saw it. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. When the floodlights came on and I turned around, it was still there. I got a very distinct look at it when it was literally right next to me. I heard it. I felt its presence. Whatever this thing was, it's real. And so he does continue on throughout the evening after that, and he goes on all of his errands, and at some point he finds himself at home. It's late at night. He falls asleep. And then at 5:30 a.m., to the second, he suddenly wakes up. And Lee said this was really weird. He didn't wake up and was groggy or anything like that. He went from being entirely asleep to entirely awake. There was no transition period. And also 5:30 a.m., I mean, Lee's not the type of guy that's going to sleep till noon, but 5:30 in the morning is really early, even for him. And so the whole thing is very odd. Just the fact that he's up so early and there was he's got no sleepiness in him at all. There was no grogginess. And so the whole situation's a little weird, especially when coupled with last night. And so instead of getting up and kind of going out and starting his morning, Lee just sort of scoots to the edge of the bed. He kind of turns the slats on the window so they open to halfway, and he's just sort of staring out his window a little bit at the sunset. And he's just sort of processing everything. And then, from the corner of his room, he hears this sound, and it starts low, and then it crescendos up. And for the next 5 to 7 seconds, he hears what it can only be a trumpet, the sound of a trumpet playing in his bedroom. And he said it wasn't outside. He didn't even get up to look outside. He said the acoustics of the situation left no doubt in his mind. This was a trumpet blaring in his bedroom. Now, there's nobody else in his bedroom. There's nobody else even in the house. There is no way that this sound could be emanating. There's no source of it whatsoever. And so for 5 to 7 seconds, it just increases and then stops. And then it's totally silent again. And he's sitting there looking around, waiting for something else to happen. And he remembers, back to all of the stories he's read about death and heaven and things like that. And the trumpets blaring. They're announcing the gates opening and things like that. I mean, this is such a weird coincidence. And so at some point, he does eventually get up and he goes about his day. And throughout his day, he keeps running into a bunch of people that he knows. And every time he runs into somebody, Lee wants to tell them what he saw, the Grim Reaper. He wants to tell them about the trumpet. He wants to tell them the entire scenario, or at least pieces of it. But in his own mind, he can't even process it. And so Lee's thinking, if I try to tell them, and I don't even know what I'm talking about, my best case scenario is that I'm going to come across as crazy. Worst case scenario, they're just going to laugh at me. And so Lee just decides, never mind, I'm not going to tell anybody, at least until I've processed this and really understand what's going on. And so it's later on in the evening, it's about 6 o'clock, and Lee decides to fire up a movie called The Untouchables. And it's actually one of Lee's and his dad's favorite movies. And so about halfway through, as he's kind of thinking about the day and his dad and the movie and all that, he pauses the movie and he shoots his dad a call. Now, his dad lives about 45 minutes away. They're pretty close. And Lee doesn't get out to see him as often as he would like because he lives almost an hour away. And so they talk on the phone quite a bit. So he shoots his dad a call and he just says, hey, I was thinking about you and, watching this movie. And so for about 30 minutes or so, they just shoot the breeze, kind of catch up and everything like that. And then towards the end of the conversation, as it's winding down, Lee just makes a decision. I'm going to tell my dad. If I can't tell my dad, who can I tell? And so Lee just says, listen, Dad, I want to tell you something that happened this morning. It's really weird. I might even sound a little bit crazy for telling you. And he's expecting his dad right away to just sort of laugh at him and be like, all right, go ahead. His dad is a pretty relaxed, casual guy, and they like to make fun of each other a little bit. So he's just expecting it. But instead, his dad very quietly, calmly, weirdly says, all right, how about this? You tell me what happened to you this morning, and I'll tell you what happened to me this morning. And so Lee, he's very intrigued by this, and it's very weird, unlike his dad. And so Lee does go on to tell him the story of the trumpet and what happened and how odd it was and how confused he was. And he doesn't mention really anything about the Grim Reaper. That's still a little bit too weird. But the trumpet thing this morning, that was really strange. And so he finishes his story, and his dad says, something pretty similar happened to me this morning. He said it was exactly 3 a.m. to the letter, and our doorbell rang. And he said, it's weird because obviously, he's lived in this house a long time. When the doorbell rang, it rang, and then it's like it cut off halfway through. It was like somehow it just stopped and didn't complete its full sound. And as long as he had lived there, he'd never heard this before. And so it was really weird. And so, he kind of shakes the sleep from his eyes, and he's thinking, did I really hear that? And then it does it again. The doorbell very clearly rings, and then partway through it just cuts off. And for some reason, for Lee's dad, this was just really weird and out of place. And so instead of getting up and answering the door, which Lee said this is what his dad would have done. He doesn't think of the supernatural or the paranormal. He's not really scared of anything. This guy's 79 years old. He lived a long life. He'll just get up and answer the door. But for some reason, on that night, at 3 a.m, he just decided, something's weird about this. And so instead he just calls out and says, who's there? No answer whatsoever. So he pauses for a second. He says, "Hello, who's there?" No answer again. And so at some point he just decides, never mind. I don't know. This is weird. I'm not gonna deal with this. And he goes back to sleep. And so they talk about that, and Lee's, like I said, he had mentioned that this was weird behavior for his father. But they wrap up the phone call, and that's kind of the end of that evening. And then over the next few days, Lee, he's just left to think, like, what could this have been? Was this just in my mind? Was this weird? Was this a coincidence? What? And 5 days after that Sunday, Lee gets a call from his sister. And she says, "Lee, I am so sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but our dad passed away this morning. He died of a heart attack. And it was totally sudden. He had no prior history of any health issues. And it was just totally out of the blue." And afterwards, Lee, after he's processing this and reflecting on it, he said, "Me and my dad, we were both the same height. We had the exact same build. We basically had the same structure, beard, hair, all that. We looked the same. And we have the same first, middle, and last name." And so here we are, 16 years later. And Lee says every day he still thinks back to that night when he thinks that by all the logic in his head, he was spared by death himself, by the grim Reaper. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you find yourself enjoying this or any of the tales on my channel, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, then please allow the spirits to guide your plan chat to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Second, all of my stories, like I mentioned, are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, please reach out to me on any of my social media and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially feature it one day here on the Orator. And so until next time, where you'll see that the fire is stoked, you may pull up your chair and settle in, and I will have another tale to tell.